Welcome to my YouTube channel. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky, where fog clings to the valleys like forgotten memories and isolation breeds secrets darker than the coal mines themselves, there once lived a woman whose very existence defied the natural order of life. Her name was Marlene Cutright, and between 1952 and 1971, she brought 17 children into the world. 17 souls born from a union so forbidden, so tangled in bloodline and family tree, that nature itself seemed to rebel against their creation. The Cutright family had lived in Harlan County since the 1800s, tucked into a hollow so remote that even the Postal Service refused to deliver there after 1945. 3 generations shared the same weathered farmhouse, its gray wood planks rotting from decades of mountain humidity. Marlene was born in 1934 to Vernon Cutright and his wife Sarah, who was also Vernon's first cousin. But the consanguinity didn't start there. It had been woven into the family fabric for nearly a century. The autumn of 1950 brought an early frost to the mountains. Marlene was 16, with raven hair that fell past her shoulders and green eyes that held the sadness of someone who already knew her fate. Her father, Vernon, had grown increasingly possessive after Sarah's death 2 years earlier. The farmhouse felt smaller each day, the walls closing in like a prison made of family obligation and geographic isolation. "You ain't never leaving this hollow," Vernon told her one October evening, his voice rough from years of chewing tobacco. "This family stays together, always has, always will." Marlene understood what he meant. She had seen her grandmother's medical records hidden in the attic, documents revealing that her grandmother had married her own uncle. She had noticed how her younger brother Samuel had been born with eyes that never quite focused, how her sister Ruth spoke in garbled sounds that no one outside the family could understand. By spring of 1951, Marlene's belly began to swell. She was 17. Vernon was her father. The pregnancy was never discussed openly, but everyone in the hollow knew. There were no doctors, no hospitals, no interventions. Just Aunt Edith, Vernon's sister, who served as midwife and had delivered dozens of children in these mountains, many born from similarly entangled bloodlines. The first child arrived in January 1952, during a blizzard that buried the hollow under 3 feet of snow. Marlene's screams echoed through the farmhouse for 14 hours. When the baby finally emerged, Aunt Edith's face went pale. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, wrapping the infant quickly in a stained blanket. The baby girl had no vocal cords. Medical science would later classify this as lingual agenesis, an extremely rare congenital condition. But in that moment, in that isolated farmhouse, it seemed like divine punishment. The child would never cry, never laugh, never speak. She opened her mouth in silent screams, her tiny face red with effort, but no sound emerged. Vernon stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What do we call her?" "Don't matter," Aunt Edith replied, her hands trembling. "She won't be answering to it." They called her Girl One. She would never receive a legal name, never be registered with any government agency, never exist in any official capacity. Marlene held her silent daughter, tears streaming down her face. The baby's eyes were clouded, a milky white that suggested blindness. Her fingers were webbed between the knuckles. Her skull had an unusual shape, slightly compressed on one side. "She's beautiful," Marlene whispered, though everyone in the room knew it was a lie born from desperate maternal love. Over the next 19 years, Marlene would give birth 16 more times. Vernon never left her alone. Each pregnancy brought new horrors, new mutations, new evidence of what happens when family trees refuse to branch. Girl 2 arrived in 1953, with her organs partially visible through translucent skin. Girl 3 in 1954 had extra fingers growing from her wrists. Boy 1 in 1955 was born without ear canals, his head smooth where ears should have been. The pattern continued, each child carrying the genetic burden of their parents' consanguinity. The hollow became a prison of silence. 17 children who could not speak, could not cry out, could not call for help. Marlene aged rapidly, her face gaunt by age 30, her body broken from constant pregnancy, and the emotional weight of knowing she was perpetuating this cycle. "Why do you keep doing this?" her sister Ruth asked during a rare moment of clarity, her garbled speech barely intelligible. Marlene looked toward the mountains, toward the world beyond the hollow that she would never see, "Because I don't know how to stop." The community in the nearby town of Ivart's population 1,200 whispered about the Cutrite family. Stories spread through the coal mining camps and Baptist churches. Some said the children were cursed, others claimed they were the result of deals made with darkness itself. But no one intervened. In 1950s Appalachia, family matters stayed family matters, no matter how disturbing. By 1960, 9 of Marlene's children had been born. The farmhouse bulged with silent bodies, children ranging from infants to 8-year-olds, all moving through the rooms like ghosts. They communicated through gestures and touches, developing their own language of survival. Channel breaks, stick around, and you'll uncover the darkest family secrets that mainstream media refuses to touch. Stories so disturbing yet so real that they'll change how you see human nature forever. The summer of 1965 brought oppressive heat to the mountains. Marlene was 31 but looked 50, her body permanently bent from carrying 13 pregnancies. The farmhouse reeked of unwashed bodies and sickness. Vernon had grown more paranoid with age, boarding up windows and posting signs warning trespassers. Inside, the children existed in a hierarchy of suffering. Girl 1, now 13, had learned to care for her younger siblings despite her blindness and silence. She navigated the farmhouse through memory and touch, changing soiled clothes, attempting to feed those who could swallow, comforting those in pain through gentle caresses. Boy 4, born in 1958, had a condition doctors would later identify as severe hydrocephalus. His head had swollen to twice normal size, the pressure causing constant agony that he could express only through the tears streaming down his face and the way his body convulsed. He would die before his 8th birthday, his body finally giving out on a humid August night in 1966. Marlene found him in the morning, his massive head resting against the wall where he had dragged himself seeking coolness. She didn't scream. She had stopped screaming years ago. "Another one gone," Vernon said, showing no emotion as he built a crude coffin from scrap wood. They buried Boy 4 in the woods behind the farmhouse, in a plot where 6 other children already rested. No markers, no ceremonies, no official death certificates. The earth simply swallowed them, and the mountains kept their secrets. But in 1966, something changed. A social worker named Patricia Drummond arrived in Harlan County as part of President Johnson's War on Poverty initiative. She was 24, fresh from the University of Kentucky, determined to help the isolated communities of Appalachia. "I've heard rumors about a family in Cutrite Hollow," she told Sheriff Buck Morrison. "Multiple children, no school enrollment, no medical care." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Drummond, some families up in those hollers don't take kindly to government interference. The Cutrites especially been up there for generations." "That's exactly why someone needs to check on them," Patricia insisted. In October 1966, Patricia made the treacherous drive up the unpaved road to Cutrite Hollow. The farmhouse appeared abandoned at first, its exterior completely closed off, but as she approached, she saw movement through cracks in the boards' faces, dozens of them, silent, staring faces. Vernon met her at the door with a shotgun. "You ain't welcome here, sir. I'm with the State Social Services. I just need to verify the well-being of any children on the premises." "Ain't no children here that concern the state." But Patricia had seen enough through the gaps. She returned to town and filed an emergency report. The description she wrote would haunt Kentucky social services for decades, observed multiple juveniles in condition of severe neglect, physical deformities apparent, no verbal communication detected, recommend immediate intervention. The county moved slowly. It took until January 1967 for a judge to issue a warrant allowing access to the property. When Sheriff Morrison, Patricia Drummond, and Dr. Howard Chen finally entered the farmhouse on a frigid morning, what they found exceeded their worst imaginings. 13 children between ages 1 and 15 were living in conditions that Dr. Chen later described as incompatible with human dignity. The medical examination revealed that all 13 children shared genetic markers consistent with first-degree consanguinity, meaning their parents were directly related as parent and child. This is the most severe case of familial relations I've encountered in 20 years of practice, Dr. Chen wrote in his report. The children exhibit multiple congenital abnormalities including cranial malformations, cardiac defects, skeletal abnormalities, sensory impairments, and universal lingual development failure, resulting in complete inability to vocalize. Marlene was pregnant again, her 14th living child. Patricia approached her gently. "Ma'am, we're here to help you. You and your children need medical care." Marlene looked at her with eyes that held no hope. "You can't help us. Nobody can. We're too far gone." Vernon was arrested that day, charged with multiple offenses. But Kentucky law in 1967 was unprepared for a case of this magnitude and complexity. The legal system struggled with how to address decades of concealed consanguinity. The children were placed in state custody, separated into different facilities because no single institution could handle their complex medical needs. Girl 1 was sent to a facility for the blind in Lexington. Others went to institutions for children with severe developmental disabilities. Several were placed in medical research settings where scientists studied the effects of extreme genetic similarity. Marlene gave birth to her 14th child in custody. The baby boy lived only 17 hours, his heart unable to sustain the fundamental structural defects he had inherited. "I'm sorry," the nurse told Marlene. "He just couldn't survive. None of them could," Marlene whispered. "Not really. They've all been dying since the moment they were born." The case of the Cutright family attracted the attention of geneticists across the United States. In 1968, Dr. Margaret Holloway from Johns Hopkins University received permission to study the surviving children's genetic profiles. What she discovered would reshape understanding of human consanguinity effects. When close biological relatives produce offspring, the likelihood of recessive genetic disorders increases dramatically. Every human carries approximately 3 to 5 harmful recessive genes. When unrelated people have children, these genes rarely match. But when a parent and child procreate, the genetic similarity is approximately 50%, meaning matching harmful genes becomes significantly more probable. The Cutright children's DNA revealed something unprecedented: the accumulation of multiple generations of consanguinity. Vernon and his wife Sarah had been first cousins. Vernon's parents had been second cousins. The genetic pool had been shrinking for nearly a century, concentrating harmful mutations with each generation. "It's like taking a copy of a copy of a copy," Dr. Holloway explained to a congressional hearing in 1969. "Each iteration loses fidelity." The Cutright children represent the tragic endpoint of genetic isolation. The lingual agenesis affecting all 17 children stemmed from a recessive gene that had been present but dormant in the Cutright line for generations. When Vernon's genes combined with Marlene's, their shared genetic heritage guaranteed its expression. But the horror extended beyond physical abnormalities. Psychological evaluations of the surviving children revealed profound developmental delays and emotional trauma. They had lived in a world without language, unable to express pain, fear, or need through voice. Dr. Samuel Torres, a child psychologist assigned to work with Girl 1, now 16 and in state care, described their first session. She sat completely still for 45 minutes. No vocalization, obviously, but also no gestures, no signing, no attempt at communication. When I placed my hand near hers, she jerked away violently. Trust had been completely destroyed. Over months of patient work, Girl 1 learned basic sign language. Her first signed sentence at age 17 was, "Why did mother keep having us?" That question haunted everyone involved in the case. Marlene herself provided partial answers during a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Linda Carrion spent dozens of hours interviewing her in 1968. "He told me it was normal," Marlene explained, her voice flat, emotionless, "that this is how mountain families kept their bloodlines pure, that outsiders wouldn't understand our ways." "Did you ever try to leave?" Dr. Carrion asked. "Where would I go? I had no education, no money, no family except them, and after the first few children I couldn't leave them behind. They needed me." Even knowing each pregnancy would produce another suffering child, Marlene was silent for a long moment. "I convinced myself each time would be different. That maybe God would grant mercy. That maybe the next one would be born whole and healthy." Current psychological understanding would classify Marlene as both victim and perpetrator, trapped in a cycle of manipulation and learned helplessness, but in 1968, such nuanced understanding was rare. The media portrayed her simply as a monster. The Lexington Herald ran a headline, "Mother of Mutants, Kentucky Woman's Horrific Legacy." The article included speculative details that were medically inaccurate but sensational. Public outrage demanded severe punishment. Channel break if you felt that deep, gut-wrenching emotion. Watching this unfold, comment right now. Those children deserve to be heard. Share their story. Give voice to those who had none. Let this comment section become the voice they never had. Vernon Cutright faced trial in 1969. The proceedings lasted 6 weeks and drew national attention. Prosecutors presented evidence of systematic control, enforced pregnancy, and concealment of births and deaths. The defense argued cultural context and mental incompetence. "My client is himself a product of consanguinity," defense attorney Robert Walsh argued. "His mental capacity is diminished. He was raised in isolation, taught that this was acceptable. He knew no other way." Medical testimony confirmed Vernon showed signs of cognitive impairment consistent with being born from a consanguineous union. IQ testing placed him at borderline intellectual functioning, but the jury convicted him on multiple counts. He received 40 years in prison, dying of heart failure in 1983 at age 69, having served only 14 years. Marlene was charged as an accessory, but received a suspended sentence based on psychiatric testimony describing her as a long-term victim of coercive control. She was released to a supervised group home in 1970. Of the 13 children taken into custody in 1967, only 6 survived to adulthood. The others succumbed to their genetic conditions, their compromised immune systems, their organ failures. They died in hospitals and institutions, still silent, still nameless to most of the world. By 1975, the surviving Cutright children had been scattered across Kentucky and Tennessee in various care facilities. Girl 1, now 23, had learned to navigate the world through touch and sign language. She lived in a group home in Louisville, working in a sheltered workshop assembling simple products. Her care coordinator, Janet Mills, described her as remarkably resilient given her circumstances, but profoundly damaged. She startles at any unexpected touch. She signs about nightmares where she's trapped in darkness, hearing her siblings suffering but unable to call out to them. Boy 5, born in 1962 with webbed hands and feet, had undergone multiple corrective surgeries. By his teenage years, he could manipulate objects with moderate success. He learned to read and write, becoming the only Cutright child capable of documenting his own experience. In a journal entry from 1976 at age 14, he wrote, "I dream about having a voice. In my dreams, I can sing. I wake up trying to make sounds, but nothing comes. It's like being buried alive inside your own throat." Everyone thinks not having a voice just means you can't talk, but it means you can't scream when you're scared. You can't laugh when something is funny. You can't cry out when you're hurt. You're trapped inside silence. Medical researchers continued studying the surviving children, documenting the long-term effects of extreme consanguinity. Dr. Holloway's 1977 paper, Multigenerational Consanguinity Effects, the Cutrite Case Study, became required reading in genetic counseling programs worldwide. The paper detailed how recessive genes for the lingual condition had been present in the Cutrite line since at least 1820, based on family records Dr. Holloway had uncovered. One ancestor, Caleb Cutrite, had a sister who could not speak from birth, according to an 1847 family Bible entry. The family's geographic and social isolation created a perfect storm for genetic concentration, Dr. Holloway wrote. Without introduction of new genetic material through marriage to outsiders, harmful recessive traits became increasingly dominant with each generation. The study also examined the psychological impact on communities where such cases occurred. Interviews with Harlan County residents revealed a complex mixture of shame, denial, and protective secrecy. "We knew something wasn't right up at that hollow," one elderly resident told researchers. "But you don't interfere in family business. That's how people get hurt or run out of town." So we just didn't talk about it. This code of silence had enabled the situation to continue for 2 decades. Child Protective Services, medical professionals, and law enforcement had all failed to intervene despite rumors and occasional reports. The Kentucky legislature responded in 1971 by strengthening mandatory reporting laws and increasing penalties for concealing births and deaths. But enforcement in remote rural areas remained challenging. Marlene spent her remaining years in relative obscurity. She worked in a hospital laundry, lived in a small apartment, and rarely spoke about her past. The few journalists who tracked her down found a woman who seemed emotionally frozen. "Do you regret having those children?" A reporter asked her in 1978. "I regret everything," she replied, "but I also can't regret them because they existed. They were real people, my babies. Even if they were born broken, they were mine." She died in 1994 at age 60 from complications of diabetes and heart disease. Her obituary made no mention of her children or her past. She was buried in a public cemetery in Louisville, her grave marked only with her name and dates. The surviving Cutrite children faced varying fates. Girl 2 died in 1982 at age 29 when her heart finally failed. Girl 5 lived until 2003, reaching age 48, making her the longest surviving child. She spent her entire adult life in institutional care, never gaining independence. Boy 5, the journal writer, died in 1995 at age 33. In his final journal entry, written a week before his death from organ failure, he reflected, "I've spent my whole life wondering what my voice would have sounded like. Would it have been deep or high? Would I have had an accent like the people from the mountains? Would I have been able to sing? I'll never know. None of us will ever know what we could have been." Today, the Cutrite farmhouse still stands in Harlan County, though nature has begun reclaiming it. The roof collapsed in 2005. Trees grow through broken windows. The crude graves in the woods are unmarked and largely forgotten. Local historians have documented the case as part of Appalachian social history, examining how poverty, isolation, and cultural factors created environments where such situations could persist. The story serves as a cautionary tale in medical ethics, genetic counseling, and child protection courses across the country. Dr. Chen, who conducted the initial medical examination in 1967, reflected in a 2010 interview before his death, "The Cutrite case represents a complete systems failure. We failed as medical professionals to reach isolated communities. We failed as a society to protect vulnerable people. We failed as neighbors to speak up when we suspected something wrong." The scientific legacy proved more constructive. Research stemming from the Cutrite case contributed to understanding of rare genetic disorders, recessive gene expression, and the cumulative effects of consanguinity. This knowledge has helped genetic counselors worldwide advise families about risks, but the human cost remains incalculable. 17 children born into suffering, denied the basic human right of voice, trapped in bodies ravaged by genetic damage. A mother caught in a cycle of victimization and perpetuation of harm. A father whose own genetic damage contributed to his inability to understand the enormity of his actions. The last surviving Cutrite child, girl 7, died in 2015 at age 59. She had spent 57 of those years in institutional care. Her death certificate listed her cause of death as cardiorespiratory failure secondary to congenital abnormalities. At her funeral, attended only by facility staff and a distant cousin who had never met her, the chaplain struggled with what to say about a life defined by suffering and silence. She endured what no human should endure, he finally said. Born into circumstances beyond her control, she survived when so many expected her to fail. In that survival, there was courage. In her silence, there was testimony to both human cruelty and human resilience. The case raises questions society still struggles to answer. How do we balance family privacy with child protection? How do we reach isolated communities without imposing cultural values? How do we support victims who are also perpetrators? What responsibility do communities have to intervene in suspected wrongdoing situations? The Cutrite children never had the chance to answer these questions for themselves. They never had the chance to testify in court, to tell their stories, to advocate for change. They lived and died in silence, their suffering known only through the observations of others. If you've watched this entire journey into one of Appalachia's darkest family secrets, you've witnessed what happens when isolation, poverty, and consanguinity create the perfect storm of human suffering. Subscribe to this channel to continue uncovering the real stories that history tried to bury, the families whose secrets were too dark to speak aloud, the children who paid the price for their ancestors' choices. If you made it to the end of this story, leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can know who truly appreciates the real, unfiltered stories shared here on this channel. Hit that like button if this story moved you, disturbed you, or made you think differently about the hidden costs of isolation. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that these aren't just stories, but real lives lived in silence and suffering. The mother of silence in Appalachia bore 17 children who never spoke a word. They never cried out in pain, never called for help, never said "I love you," or "I'm scared," or "please stop." They existed in a prison of genetic damage and enforced quiet, their lives a testament to what happens when family trees refuse to branch. Their story ends not with resolution but with remembrance. Somewhere in Kentucky, unmarked graves hold children who never had names. Their silence continues even in death, but by telling their story, by refusing to let their suffering be forgotten, we give them something they never had in life: a voice.